Okay, finishing up our peacock here. So, a few things. What we want to do is, for instance, looking at the beak, you just want to add some more detail to the beak here. So for instance, we started doing some shading. And now I'm going to just outline some of those two little breathing holes. We don't have too much to do on this one, but I wanted to show you. And a little bit of a line right here. So I'm pretty much just outlining a little bit of that beak. And then smoothing out the color by blending it all in, just coloring it a little bit. And you can add just a slight hint of black where the beak separates, right there. And a little bit right there. There we go. So that's the beak. Also want to finish up the eye. So we started doing that. And now you want to just do a few finishing touches. So what I'm doing is doing another outlining, just a little bit. I'm going to color in the pupil a little darker. And then the eye is a little darker in the corner here. And then we're going to add a little bit of brown and yellow. I'm going to add a little bit of yellow here. Actually, I like the yellow and the black. That looks good, so I think I'm going to leave that. Okay. Okay, so once we have that, I want to show you a bit of the fur. So what we started to do was do the small circles on his head, and then you can go back in with some black towards some of it. So for instance, if we take a look, actually let's take a look here. And if you see, I'm going to show you, that was one of my unfinished ones from another class. If you take a look, see it's darker towards the beak. So I'm going to make those circles a bit darker with my black. I'm even going to add a little bit of the black here. Let's see how I'm outlining a little bit of those bumps. And then here and there, especially towards the edge here. Do a bit of that. And the edge here along the stripe. And while you're at it, you can outline the stripe. Oops. Broke my point there. It's still a little pointy, so that's good. You want to make sure you have a nice point, especially when doing this detail part. So you have a bit of the black, and then you can also go in with your blue and make it a little darker. Again, especially towards the beak. And there is a bit of green in here. Again, towards the darker parts, which are near the beak. So I'm just adding, and I'm using the regular green, not the dark green. And so basically you want to do the same thing for the rest of the top here of the head. Got a little bit darker blue here. And so what I'm doing now is I'm filling it in, filling in the color with very light circular motion. I'm gonna do an outlining with my blue outside of our stripe and underneath the eye. And then I'm going to start outlining this section so it's shaded darker towards the beak and the eye and up here. I'm going to outline that part too. And there's a shadow right underneath his neck that we're also going to add black to. The shadow here. So right now what I'm doing is I'm adding sort of the shadow parts that are a little bit darker in color. And now I'm doing shading. So I'm shading. This is with my lighter blue. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to shade, make it a bit darker on either side of his neck, and then in the middle there's more white. We've already started the fur. I'm just going to do a light shading on top of that fur, and then we're going to add more detail to that. I'm going to do very light shading, excuse me, in the middle, almost leaving that white. Just a little bit of shading there. If you notice, I'm using a circular motion when I color. I'm going to also outline here. Okay, I also moved the small piece of paper a little closer so you could sort of see it. I'll put that on top. So just continuing to shade in with the light blue and I'm not pressing very hard. I just want to kind of cover it a little bit. And remember, this middle part here, where I'm sort of drawing those lines, this part here, excuse me, is a little bit lighter. So that's why you just want to keep that as light as possible. And we get darker up here. So I press a little harder. And then we're going to start to add our fur. And our fur goes, basically, you skip some sections and you pull your pencil from the bottom to the top, and you do that all the way down. See, and it goes in different directions. Doing it very lightly. And then we're going to add the darker blue. And you do want to go in the middle. So right here, the fur is going in this direction. And probably what I'll do is I'll send all of you the picture along with it, in case you don't have it. And then you can copy off of it as you're finishing your peacock. So now I'm just blending in some of that fur. And some of the fur goes where the lightest part is down the neck. So I'm just adding very light indications of fur towards that middle. That's our first step of building up the fur. And now you're going to take your regular blue, which serves as the darker blue, and you're going to go over some of those spots that we did with the blue we were using. You're going to outline again 2 stripes, color in some more. So it's all about layering with colored pencils and watercolors. All about layering. And you want the other color to shine through. So as you can see, the lighter blue is still shining through. Now I'm doing underneath, the shadow underneath the neck. I'm now taking that blue, which is really your regular blue in your set. Like if you have a basic set, and I'm now doing the finishing touches. With the shadows. just take your time. Hopefully this will be relaxing for you. I want this to be a little darker. This is also where you can go in with this dark blue or regular blue. Make it a little darker. Do some outlining. Some darker spots right on the bumps of his head. Also want to add darker blue now to the, I call them the plumes. I don't know what these are called on top of his head. Think of them as like each individual tulips. That's what they look like to me, tulips. Okay, and going back to our neck. Now shading with the blue. This is the regular blue that serves as our darker blue. Doing the same thing on the other side. See, the color is a bit darker right underneath his head. Then we're going to go back and add some black, just spots of black. And since he has fur, you want the edge of him to not be a stark line. You know how, so see how we're outlining it, but you can let that line be a bit fuzzy. See how I'm acting like some fur sticking out by coloring in the line over it with my colored pencil. Okay, so after you've colored that in, you're going to then keep going with the fur, adding the darker layers. And I know it's a little bit tedious, so you might want to go and grab a snack in between. So here's what I'm doing. Fur sticks out, you know, think of it as fur. You know, it's sticking out a bit from his body. Right here, there's some patches of darker fur, so you can actually color in just a little bit. Motion like that. Some of the fur. So now what I'm doing is adding that top layer of fur. So see, everything's in layers. We do a little bit of individual hairs. And then some coloring on top of that. So now we're just trying to get that color a bit darker. Again, I want the edges of his neck to be darker. So what I'm doing is, see, I'm going back over and I'm giving it a fur-like appearance to the edge. And then as I'm going towards the middle, filling up that space ever so slightly with very light strokes of hair. So it's not completely white. But it appears white. Then I want you to get your green. And you're going to fill in over top and over here some green. Parts of the head, mostly towards this section. And you're going to go back, press harder on your blue. And there's some little spots here that are darker. And then we're going to add our black to that to get that darker. So we've got our black. Again, going over some of those spots, but not covering it. We're now just intensifying the shadow parts. So you see how the colors lay upon different colors, and that's what creates the richness. Pretty cool if you think about it. Oops. I'm going to add some black up here. And a bit over here. Outlining, they're black. And there's some shadow over here with the black. Make this a little more intense here. I'm also going to just do a very light shading right in here with that stripe. More intense with the eye. Okay. Now going to do these individual feathers here. I'm going to take, oops, take my orange again and just color in the parts in the middle. I'm doing it lightly. Then we're going to color the green over it. We're going to do that in lines. So as you notice, in the middle, it's sort of a little bit of a shape that's sort of like a line. But again, everything's really light, especially towards the bottom. Okay. And you're going to take your blue, so the lighter blue, and you're going to color in the middle of the orange, kind of making like a little bit of almost like a rainbow shape. So I'm doing that in each part of the orange. And as you can see, I mean, I'm going pretty fast. Now I'm going to color everything yellow. So a darker yellow here. You know, before we did a very light shading of yellow. Now, I'm going to make sure that it's much more concentrated, the color. And as you can see, I'm not worrying so much about each individual one. I'm also going to go over here and make that yellow. And so now you're just adding yellow. And making sure that you color all of it. And then what we're going to do is add our individual lines of the light green and a little bit of the lighter blue. And that's your detail for feathers. Okay, so I've gone and stopped the recording and just added yellow to basically the rest of these feathers and the individual ones here. Now we're going to go back to these and I'm going to do little lines with our green. Little individual lines for each one. And you want to press down hard so that you get those lines. And you're going to do that for each individual one. And then you're going to go over it in your light blue. So I'm going to complete that here. Okay, so I've completed doing all the lines in each of the individual peacock feathers. I've also come over here and done, added this green. Again, think of it as a rainbow, the outside of it. And now I'm going to just press a little bit harder with my green, color in a little bit towards the edges surrounding each peacock feather. This is with my green. So almost like, think about it almost like you're outlining and then you're adding a bit of that darker green color to each individual one. See, you can give some shape. So you're doing that for each individual one. And then you're going to add a bit of your blue. Okay, so now I finished those feathers, and now I'm just going to go in a bit with my blue. And same thing, just going over, adding some of those lines, a bit with the blue. You can also do the same thing. We did the green, how we started outlining, and now you're going to outline with the blue. So basically, again, you think of this as layering. You want those individual colors to show through. And now I'm doing a little bit of coloring with my blue along with my outlining of each one. And then sometimes add a little bit of my stripes. So I'm not coloring it to cover over what we've done, but I'm adding a bit of the blue. So you're going to do that for each individual one. Sometimes you add a little bit more color, like what I'm doing, like coloring it in very lightly. But you always want to outline. So if it helps, you can outline first, which now I'm going back and kind of doing. Outline each individual one. Okay, so now that that's all shaded, now I'm going to hop over here and we're going to finish these. So remember, we make our little upside down hearts. I'm doing this with the lighter blue. We started with the darker blue. finishing those up. And I grab my darker blue for this one to make another heart shape in the middle. So again, it's all about the layering. Okay, I'm going to take my orange again. This one needs to be layered a bit more, blended a bit more. So I'm doing that. Blending that with my already put down yellow, and then I'm blending the orange on top. The tips or edges around the circular part are a bit darker with the orange. Again, doing the same over here. And for this one, and then you want to fill in any yellow around the tips. So you're kind of making it, think of it like, to me this looks like fire, right? So you're going to do yellow, a shape like this. And then we can complete the brown and the green. You can then start to take your dark green. For instance, we're going to start here. And this is where you're going to start with your detail. And the same thing over here. Color in a little bit of your green. Right here. I have to move the original section here. And you go in with your dark green and your light green. Basically, all kinds of swirls to make those feathers. And you just start to layer. And sometimes you make the swirls a little darker. And this is really the ending part. The last detail. This. And then you would go back with your brown. So see, some of it I'm doing lighter strokes. I'm just sort of following the direction of each of these individual peacock feathers. Color in a little bit here with my green, give it a little bit of background. See, and they all come from the stem over here. Some wild ones over here. See, and again, this is layering too. Different ones going in different directions. And finally, I'm going to take my brown. And so we're going to do a combination of how we start each sort of shading in our brown. Make it a little bit darker. And so now I'm just shading a little bit of brown. Give it that background, and then we're going to add some of the brown. So there's some more brown by this section. Over here. Then over here. You want to try and get it sort of even, not terribly even, meaning the coloring. But you don't want sort of chunks of colored pencil sticking out too much. So I tend to go a little darker up at the top and in the corners. Okay, and then again, we start adding our brown. And this is our final step. And I'm going to add a little bit of brown here. And then you can also go in with some white. On top of all this. But you don't have to. This can be your final step if you like. And you see I'm varying my lines, so sometimes I make the brown a little bit darker. Sometimes I do it lighter. Also want to make sure that the brown ones from this section on his head are a bit darker. And then you can also go in with your brown on top of your blue. Just give it a little bit of shadow there. A more definition. So you can keep going and adding layers of your brown. But that is pretty much our finished peacock. So I can't wait to see what these look like. Take a picture and send them to me, please. And I hope you liked this tutorial. I know it's a long one and it's in depth, but I can't wait to see these because I think they're gonna look amazing. So thank you very much, and I will see you for the next workshop.